During dinner, my parents just scoffed, "What's IT like being the most useless person here?" Everyone laughed. I said, "And what's IT like hearing this useless one won't cover your bills any longer?" The instant those words left my lips. Can you imagine being called useless by your own father, in front of your entire family, in the middle of a fancy restaurant? The kind of place where people whisper, not shout. That night, when he sneered those words, and everyone laughed, something inside me finally, irrevocably shattered. Growing up in the Thompson household felt like walking on eggshells every single day. My parents, Robert and Diane, had this uncanny ability to make me feel utterly inadequate, no matter what I achieved. I'd bring home straight A's, and my dad would just glance at my report card, asking why I wasn't doing more extracurriculars like normal kids. I won the regional science fair in 8th grade, and my mom sighed, lamenting that I hadn't put that much effort into my appearance. This wasn't just a phase, it was the soundtrack to my entire childhood. My achievements were constantly shrunk down, while my flaws? Oh, they were magnified and put on display for everyone. Family gatherings became their stage, where they'd perform their favorite routine, the disappointment show, starring their daughter, Natalie. Despite that crushing lack of emotional support, I did excel academically. I was so determined to prove my worth, though it always felt like I was chasing an impossibly high bar they'd set. When I got a full scholarship to a prestigious university for computer science, my father just grunted that I was lucky, and anyone can get into college these days. My mother wondered aloud why I hadn't chosen a more suitable career for a woman. It was infuriating. College became my escape, my sanctuary. Away from their relentless criticism, I absolutely thrived. I graduated at the top of my class, with multiple job offers from incredible tech companies. I landed a position at TechSphere, a growing software company, and I flourished. Within 3 years, I'd been promoted twice and was leading my own development team by the time I was 25. My financial success came quickly, but it brought with it an unexpected, heavy burden. 6 months after I started my career, my father lost his job. My mother, who'd never worked outside the home, called me in hysterics, truly sobbing, convinced they were going to lose their house. Without a second thought, I offered to help. Temporarily. Just until they got back on their feet. What started as a short-term solution morphed into a permanent fixture in my life. Soon, I wasn't just covering their mortgage, it was their car payments, their utility bills, even their weekly grocery expenses. Every single month, nearly 40% of my income vanished, funneling directly into their lives. And you know what? There was never, ever a word of gratitude. Instead, they acted like it was my absolute obligation. "After all we did raising you," my mother would say, "it's the least you could do." The fact that I'd practically raised myself, cooked my own meals since I was 12, and put myself through college on scholarships? Conveniently forgotten details. Despite my massive financial contributions, their emotional abuse didn't subside. If anything, it got worse. During our weekly phone calls, my mother would fret about my love life, expressing concern that I'd end up alone with all those computers. My father would grill me about my savings, implying I should be making more money by now. Every single conversation left me feeling utterly drained, worthless. My therapist, Dr. Winters, had been gently nudging me for months, trying to get me to establish boundaries with them. "Your relationship with them is fundamentally unbalanced," she'd say. "You are giving everything, and receiving emotional harm in return." I knew she was right, deep down, but the thought of confronting my parents, it terrified me. I had been conditioned since childhood to crave their approval, and the idea of disappointing them even further felt unbearable. Months turned into years, and my resentment grew right alongside my career success. I bought my own condominium, a modern one-bedroom in a great neighborhood, while still paying the mortgage on their 3-bedroom suburban home. I drove a modest used car, while I was financing my father's brand-new SUV. I budgeted my personal expenses down to the penny, while my mother shopped freely with the allowance I provided her. The emotional toll was becoming unbearable. I developed gnawing anxiety, experiencing full-blown panic attacks before family gatherings. I started making excuses to miss Sunday dinners, only to be bombarded with the most intense guilt-tripping texts and phone calls imaginable. "I guess your family isn't important enough for you anymore," my mother would sigh. "Now that you have your fancy job, you're too good for us," my father would add, his voice dripping with sarcasm. In the weeks leading up to that fateful dinner, the tension had been building, a suffocating pressure. My younger sister, Amanda, announced her engagement, and my parents immediately, gleefully, volunteered to host an extravagant engagement party. They knew, absolutely knew, that I would be footing the entire bill. When I cautiously suggested a more modest celebration, my mother accused me of being jealous of my sister. My father called me selfish and reminded me that I owed them for all they had sacrificed. The breaking point was hurtling towards us faster than I realized. Years of suppressed feelings were bubbling to the surface, and I just needed one more push to make everything explode. The monthly family dinner was a tradition I had reluctantly established and funded for 3 years. Every first Friday, I'd reserve a table at a nice restaurant, and my entire family would gather to enjoy an evening of fine dining, at my expense. These dinners easily cost me several $100s, but I justified it as the price of maintaining family harmony. On this particular Friday in April, I had reserved a table at Lame, an upscale French restaurant downtown. The occasion was supposedly a celebration of my recent promotion to Senior Development Manager. But I strongly suspected my family was far more interested in the expensive menu than my career achievement. The guest list included my parents, Robert and Diane, my younger sister Amanda and her fiancé, Jackson, my brother Michael and his wife Sarah, and even my mother's sister, Aunt Patricia, who never, ever missed an opportunity for a free meal. I arrived early, as usual, to make sure everything was perfect. The hostess led me to our reserved table, a round booth in the corner under a sparkling chandelier. As I sat there, alone, waiting for them, I felt that familiar knot of anxiety tightening in my stomach. I checked my watch repeatedly, knowing they'd be at least 15 minutes late, as they always were. The anticipation of their inevitable criticism made my hands tremble slightly, and I found myself taking deep, shaky breaths to stay calm. My parents arrived first, 20 minutes late. My mother air-kissed my cheek without actually making contact, while my father merely gave a curt nod in my direction. They immediately ordered the most expensive drinks on the menu, without even a hello. My mother complained about the parking, implying I should have chosen a restaurant with valet service. My father scrutinized the menu prices with raised eyebrows, though he knew perfectly well I'd be covering the entire bill. "You look tired," my mother commented, her standard greeting, regardless of how I actually looked. I was wearing a new dress I'd bought just for this, and had spent extra time on my hair and makeup. "Are they working you too hard at that company? Your skin is breaking out." "I'm fine, Mom," I replied, resisting the urge to touch my face self-consciously. "Just busy with the new position." My father grunted. "They probably promoted you because they need more women in management. Companies do that nowadays for their image." Before I could even respond, the rest of the family arrived in a noisy cluster. Amanda immediately commanded attention, flashing her engagement ring dramatically. My brother, Michael, looked uncomfortable, as he often did at these gatherings, while his wife, Sarah, just smiled politely. Aunt Patricia made a beeline for the wine list. Once everyone was seated and drinks were ordered, my mother, as always, seized control of the conversation. She launched into an elaborate description of the wedding plans she was making for Amanda. The engagement was barely a month old, but I noticed with a sinking feeling that the plans sounded expensive. And I already knew who was expected to contribute significantly. "We're thinking a minimum of 200 guests," my mother announced grandly. "And the Riverfront Gardens venue would be perfect, wouldn't it, Natalie?" She looked at me pointedly. Riverfront Gardens was one of the most expensive wedding venues in the city. I nodded noncommittally, but my mother, of course, took this as full agreement. "Wonderful. I'll put down the deposit next week." They required $10,000 to hold the date. $10,000. The amount hung in the air, a silent accusation. Everyone at that table knew exactly who would be providing that money. That seems like a lot for a deposit, I said carefully, trying to keep my voice even. Well, quality costs money, my mother replied dismissively. Not everything can be cheap like your apartment. My one-bedroom condo had cost me $350,000 in the competitive city market, but I let the comments slide, as I always did. The conversation continued like this throughout the appetizers. My father complained about needing a new golf club membership because his current one had gone downhill. Patricia mentioned her upcoming vacation to Europe, looking at me expectantly, as if waiting for an offer to fund it. Amanda talked endlessly about wedding details, each one more extravagant than the last. By the time our main courses arrived, I was strung tighter than a violin string. No one had asked about my promotion. No one had shown any interest in my accomplishments. Instead, the conversation revolved entirely around what everyone needed or wanted, with the unspoken understanding that I was their personal ATM. So, Natalie, my father said suddenly, his voice carrying across the table, cutting through the chatter. I heard your company is having layoffs. Should you really be spending money on dinners like this? The table fell absolutely silent. My company wasn't having layoffs. In fact, we were expanding rapidly. My promotion had come with a significant raise and equity package. There are no layoffs, I said quietly, trying to quell the rising anger. The company is doing very well. That's not what I read online, my father insisted, a smug look on his face. Tech companies are struggling. You should be saving your money. The staggering irony of this statement, coming from a man whose entire lifestyle I largely funded, was completely lost on him. Robert's right, my mother chimed in, nodding sagely. You need to be more careful with money. You're not getting any younger, and no man wants a woman who can't manage her finances. I felt my face growing hot, a familiar flush of shame and rage. I manage my finances very well, I said, my voice strained. Really? My father scoffed, looking around the table. Then why are you still in that tiny apartment? Everyone else your age has a real house by now. Everyone else my age isn't paying for 2 households. I wanted to scream, but I bit my tongue so hard I almost tasted blood. Amanda, ever the opportunist, seized the moment to talk about the house she and Jackson were planning to buy after the wedding. We're looking at the Oak Ridge neighborhood, she chirped. The houses there start around $600,000. Lovely area, my mother approved. Natalie, maybe you could help them with the down payment as a wedding gift? 20% would be, what, $120,000? That would be so generous of you. The sheer audacity of that suggestion left me momentarily speechless. I was already expected to pay for the wedding, and now a house down payment too? The tension at the table was a physical thing, thick in the air, and I could feel something profound shifting inside me. Years of suppressed feelings were finally, violently, threatening to surface. I took a sip of water, trying desperately to stay calm. Actually, I began, my voice barely a whisper, I've been thinking about buying a house myself. Maybe in Oak Ridge, too. The silence that followed was deafening. My family exchanged glances, clearly disturbed by the revolutionary idea that I might spend my own money on myself for once. Don't be ridiculous, my father finally said, his voice laced with contempt. You don't need a house. What would you do with all that space? It would be wasted on you. Besides, my mother added, you need to focus on helping Amanda right now. Her future is just beginning. And what about my future? I asked, surprising even myself with the question. My father let out a short, dismissive laugh, a sound that cut through me like a knife. He looked around the table, practically inviting everyone to join in his amusement at my expense. Your future. Come on, Natalie. Let's be realistic here. And then came the words that would change everything. Leaning forward, a sneer twisting his mouth, he asked, loudly enough for nearby tables to hear, how does it feel being the most useless one here? Everyone laughed. My mother, my sister, my aunt. Even my brother Michael gave an uncomfortable chuckle. Only Sarah, my brother's wife, remained silent, looking down at her plate. In that precise, agonizing moment, something inside me didn't just break, it completely disintegrated. Or perhaps, something was finally, irrevocably fixed. The crushing weight of years of emotional abuse and financial exploitation suddenly became unbearable. I couldn't carry it anymore. The laughter around the table seemed to stretch into an eternity as I sat there, my face burning with humiliation, but beneath it, a cold, hard anger began to form. In that suspended moment, memories flashed through my mind, the countless times I'd been belittled, the sacrifices I'd made, the money I'd poured into their lives, the emotional abuse I'd endured, all in the desperate, futile hope of earning a love that never came. I looked at my father's smug expression, my mother's amused smile, my sister's gleeful face, and something crystallized within me. Clarity. Resolve. They replaced my usual paralyzing anxiety. Without planning to, without the careful filtering I typically applied to every word I spoke to my family, I responded. My voice was steady, calm, cutting through the last vestiges of their mirth. "How does it feel?" I said, looking him dead in the eye, knowing this useless one will not be paying your bills anymore. The laughter stopped abruptly. 5 shocked faces stared back at me, my words hanging in the suddenly silent air. My father's expression shifted from amusement to confusion, then, rapidly, to pure rage. "What are you talking about?" he demanded, his voice low, intense. "Exactly what I said," I replied, surprised by the absolute steadiness in my voice. "I'm done. No more mortgage payments. No more car loans. No more utility bills. No more credit card payments. No more funding your lifestyle while you treat me like garbage." My mother's face paled. "Natalie, you can't be serious. You're just being sensitive, as usual." "I have never been more serious in my life," I said, my voice rising slightly. "For years, I have given you everything I could, financially and emotionally. And what have I gotten in return? Criticism, mockery, and disrespect. After everything we've done for you," my father began, his face red with anger, "this is how you repay us? By making a scene in public? What exactly have you done for me?" I asked, genuinely curious about what he believed his contributions had been. "Did you pay for my education? No, I earned scholarships. Did you support my career choices? No, you belittled them. Did you even provide emotional support? No, you tore down every accomplishment. We gave you life," my mother wailed melodramatically. "We raised you, fed you, clothed you. The bare minimum required by law," I noted, my voice ice cold. "And I have been repaying that basic parental obligation 100-fold for years now." My father's strategy shifted from anger to intimidation, his specialty. "You won't cut us off," he said with cold certainty. "You wouldn't dare." "Watch me," I replied, pulling out my phone. "In fact, let me show you how serious I am." I opened my banking app, and with a few taps, canceled the automatic payment scheduled to go to their mortgage company the following Monday. "There. That's the last mortgage payment you will ever receive from me." My mother gasped. "Natalie, that payment is due next week." "How will we pay it?" "The same way other adults do," I said calmly. "With your own money, from your own jobs." "You know your father hasn't been able to find suitable work," my mother protested, her voice cracking. "He hasn't been looking," I corrected her. "Why would he, when he has me as his personal ATM?" My sister Amanda, seeing the flow of easy money potentially drying up right before her expensive wedding, decided to intervene. "Natalie, you're being cruel. Mom and Dad have always supported you. And what about my wedding? You promised." "I never promised to pay for your wedding," I said, my composure unnerving even myself. "That was decided for me, not by me. Just like everything else." My brother Michael, who had remained silent until now, surprisingly spoke up. She has a point, you know. Natalie has been supporting everyone for years, and no one ever thanks her. Instead, you all just demand more. I looked at Michael, genuinely stunned and grateful. It was the first time he had ever defended me against our parents. My father immediately turned his anger toward Michael. Stay out of this. This is between us and your sister. No, Michael said firmly, surprising everyone again. This involves all of us. And the way we've been taking advantage of Natalie. My mother, seeing her control of the situation slipping away, resorted to her most effective tactic, tears. Her eyes welled up on command, and she delicately dabbed at them with her napkin. I cannot believe my own daughter would do this to us. After all the sacrifices we made. What sacrifices, Mom? I asked, challenging her directly. Name one significant sacrifice you've made for me in the last 10 years. She couldn't answer. Instead, she turned to my aunt for support. Patricia, can you believe how she's speaking to us? Aunt Patricia, who had been quietly calculating how this development might affect her own financial interests, chose her words carefully. Perhaps we should all calm down and discuss this privately, not in a restaurant. There is nothing to discuss, I said, my voice resolute. I have made my decision. I will not be financially supporting any of you anymore. My father slammed his hand on the table, making the glasses jump and several nearby diners turn and stare. You listen to me, young lady. You have obligations to this family. You cannot just walk away. Actually, I can, I said, gathering my purse and standing up. I have no legal obligation to support capable adults who choose not to support themselves. My only obligation was a moral one, based on the mistaken belief that you actually loved and valued me. That illusion is now gone. If you walk out that door, my father threatened, his eyes blazing, don't expect to be welcomed back into this family. I looked around the table at the faces of my family. People who had taken everything and given nothing. Who had mocked and belittled me, even as they cashed my checks. That is not the threat you think it is, I said quietly, a profound sense of peace washing over me. Being excluded from this toxic dynamic sounds more like a reward than a punishment. With those words, I walked away from the table, feeling both terrified and strangely liberated. As I passed the hostess stand, I paused to pay for the meals that had already been served, and apologized for the disturbance. Then I stepped out into the cool evening air, took a deep breath, and felt, for the first time in years, the weight beginning to lift from my shoulders. Driving home, my emotions cycled rapidly between elation at finally standing up for myself, raw fear about the repercussions, and a deep, aching sadness for the loving family I had always wanted, but never had. My phone began buzzing incessantly with texts and calls, but I ignored them all. Tonight was for me. To begin processing what had just happened and what it meant for my future. The moment I stepped into my condominium, my phone exploded. 15 missed calls, 28 text messages, and 3 voicemails, all from family members. I silenced my phone and placed it face down on the counter, needing space to simply breathe. My hands were shaking as I poured myself a glass of water. The adrenaline that had carried me through the confrontation was subsiding, leaving me feeling utterly drained, but strangely peaceful. For the first time in years, I had spoken my truth without filtering it through the lens of what my family wanted to hear. The texts had started arriving before I'd even left the restaurant parking lot. I finally gathered the courage to read them. From Mom, how could you embarrass us like this? Call me immediately. From Dad, you are making a huge mistake. We need to talk now. From Amanda, you are ruining everything. What about my wedding? From Aunt Patricia, your behavior was shocking. Your poor mother is in tears. Only 2 messages offered any support. From Michael, are you okay? I think you did the right thing. From Sarah, proud of you for standing up for yourself. Let me know if you need anything. I decided not to respond to any of them that night. Instead, I ran a hot bath, something I rarely had time to do, and allowed myself to simply exist, without the constant pressure of family obligations. The next morning, I called Dr. Winters and scheduled an emergency therapy session for that afternoon. When I arrived at her office, the familiar, calm environment helped settle my frayed nerves. "You stood up to your family," she said after I recounted the previous night's events. It was a statement, not a question. "I did," I confirmed. "And I feel both terrible and relieved." "Both reactions are completely normal," she assured me. "You have disrupted a long-established dynamic. That is bound to feel uncomfortable, even when it's the right thing to do." We spent the session exploring my feelings of guilt and examining the beliefs that had kept me trapped in that cycle of financial exploitation. Dr. Winters helped me see that my parents had conditioned me to feel responsible for their well-being, completely reversing the natural parent-child relationship. "What you did took immense courage," she told me. "Now comes the harder part, maintaining your boundaries, despite the pressure they will inevitably apply." Her words proved prophetic. By Monday morning, my parents had escalated their attempts to regain control. My father showed up at my workplace unannounced, creating such a scene in the lobby that security had to escort him out. My mother left tearful voicemails about how they would lose their house without my help. Amanda sent a detailed breakdown of wedding expenses, with payment deadlines highlighted, as if our conversation had never even happened. The most shocking escalation came on Wednesday. My parents contacted my emergency contact at work, my colleague and friend Julia, claiming there was a family emergency and they needed to reach me immediately. When Julia called me into her office to relay the message, I just broke down. I told her everything. "That's financial abuse," she said bluntly. "And emotional abuse, too, Natalie. No wonder you've been so stressed. You've been carrying an entire family on your back." Having someone outside the situation validate my experience was incredibly powerful. Julia shared that her own mother had been financially controlling, though in a different way, and she had also had to establish firm boundaries. "The guilt never completely goes away," she admitted. "But it gets easier to recognize it as a programmed response that you don't have to act on." Armed with support from my therapist, and now Julia, I felt stronger. I finally decided to assess the actual financial damage of years of supporting my family. I met with a financial advisor, Blake Richardson, who helped me create a comprehensive picture of my situation. The numbers were absolutely staggering. Over the past 4 years, I had given my parents more than $200,000. This included their mortgage payments, car loans, credit card bills, and loans that were never repaid. Additionally, I had spent approximately $50,000 on family dinners, holidays, and gifts. If I had invested that money instead, Blake calculated, I would have had enough for a substantial down payment on a house in any neighborhood I desired, plus a healthy retirement fund. "The good news," Blake said gently, "is that you are still young, and your income is excellent. Now that you are not supporting multiple households, you can quickly rebuild your savings." We created a new financial plan focused solely on my goals, rather than my family's demands. For the first time, I allowed myself to envision a future based on my own dreams, a comfortable home of my own, travel experiences I had always postponed, and eventually, true financial independence. 2 weeks after the restaurant confrontation, I received an unexpected piece of mail. It was a bank statement for a credit card I didn't recognize, showing a balance of $22,000. Upon closer inspection, I realized with horror that it was a credit card in my name, but I had never applied for it or used it. I immediately called the credit card company and discovered that the card had been opened 3 years ago, using my social security number and personal information. The address on the account was my parents' house. The customer service representative informed me that regular payments had been made until recently, when 2 payments had been missed. The revelation that my parents had committed identity theft left me reeling. I pulled my credit report and found 2 additional credit cards and a personal loan, all in my name, but clearly used by my parents. The total fraudulent debt exceeded $45,000. With shaking hands, I called my lawyer, David Mercer, who specialized in both family and financial law. He confirmed what I suspected: my parents' actions constituted identity theft and fraud, serious crimes that could result in criminal charges. You have two options, David explained. You can file a police report, which would likely lead to criminal charges against your parents. Or, you can handle it civilly, by disputing the fraudulent accounts with documentation that you did not authorize them. The decision weighed incredibly heavily on me. Despite everything, the thought of my parents facing criminal charges was difficult to bear. After careful consideration, I chose to dispute the accounts without filing police charges, on the condition that my parents sign a legally binding agreement to repay the legitimate debts they had incurred. Armed with this irrefutable evidence and David's legal counsel, I arranged to meet my parents at a neutral location, a conference room at David's office. When they arrived, their expressions shifted from self-righteous anger to visible discomfort upon seeing my lawyer present. "What is this about?" my father demanded, trying to sound tough. "Why did you bring a lawyer?" Without preamble, I placed the credit reports and account statements on the table between us. "This is about identity theft and fraud," I said calmly. "These accounts were opened in my name without my knowledge or consent." The color drained from my mother's face. My father attempted his usual blustering denial, but the evidence was irrefutable. "You have two choices," I informed them, following David's guidance. "Either sign this agreement to repay the $45,000 in fraudulent debt, or I file a police report for identity theft." "You'd send your own parents to jail?" my mother gasped, her voice shrill. "You're willing to make this right without criminal charges," David interjected smoothly, laying out the terms. After hours of negotiation, during which my parents cycled through denial, anger, and eventually desperate bargaining, they signed the repayment agreement. The terms were strict: monthly payments directly to the creditors, with their house as collateral. If they missed even one payment, I would proceed with criminal charges. As they left the office, defeated and sullen, I felt no joy in my victory. Only deep sadness for what our relationship had become, and raw anger at their betrayal. Yet beneath those feelings, there was a growing sense of empowerment. I was finally taking control of my life, and protecting myself from those who had exploited me for years. That evening, I received an unexpected text from my sister, Amanda. "Can we talk privately?" "No, Mom and Dad." Cautiously, I agreed to meet her for coffee the next day. When we met, I was surprised to find a very different Amanda than the entitled bride-to-be from the dinner. She looked tired, subdued. "I had no idea," she began, her voice barely a whisper. "About the credit cards, the loans, everything they were doing to you. Would it have mattered?" I asked honestly, my voice devoid of malice. She looked down at her coffee. "I don't know. Maybe not before. But it does now." She paused. "They've been telling everyone that you abandoned the family, that you're selfish and cruel. But Michael told me what really happened. And then I found some of the paperwork for those credit cards while looking for something in Dad's office." For the first time, my sister was seeing our parents clearly, without the filter of favoritism that had protected her all these years. It was a painful awakening for her. "I'm postponing the wedding," she continued. "Jackson and I are going to save up ourselves, do something smaller. It's not right to expect you to pay for everything, especially after what they did." Her words were the first genuine acknowledgement from any family member of how unfairly I had been treated. It wasn't quite an apology, but it was a start. My brother Michael called later that week, expressing similar realizations. "I always knew they favored Amanda and treated you differently," he admitted. "But I had no idea about the financial stuff. Sarah has been telling me for years that something wasn't right about how they expected you to support them, but I didn't want to see it." These conversations with my siblings were bittersweet. On one hand, it was validating to have them finally recognize the abuse I had endured. On the other, it highlighted how long they had been willing to benefit from my exploitation without questioning it. As the weeks passed, the full extent of the fallout from my decision became painfully apparent. My parents, desperate to maintain their lifestyle without my financial support, began spreading increasingly malicious lies about me to extended family and their social circle. According to them, I had suffered some kind of mental breakdown, had fallen under the influence of bad people at work, or was selfishly hoarding money while they faced destitution. Most painfully, they told my grandmother, who lived in another state and with whom I had always been close, that I had cut them off without reason, and refused to speak to them, despite their loving attempts to reconcile. When my grandmother called me, concerned and confused, I had to gently explain the reality of the situation, including the identity theft. Her shock and subsequent anger toward my parents was yet another painful ripple effect of their actions. I always thought Robert was too controlling with money, she told me, but I never imagined he would steal from his own daughter. Your grandfather would be appalled. The family divide deepened as relatives began taking sides. My father's brothers rallied around him, leaving unpleasant messages about family loyalty and duty. My mother's younger sister, who had always been more independent than my mother, reached out to offer support. Your mother has always been jealous of anyone who can stand on their own 2 feet, she confided. She resented me for starting my own business instead of relying on a husband or children. I'm not surprised she resents your success too. This insight into my mother's psychology was illuminating, but did little to ease the pain of her betrayal. I had always believed that beneath her criticism was love and pride in my accomplishments. Now I had to face the possibility that her feelings toward me were far more complicated, and perhaps darker, than I had allowed myself to see. The financial revelations continued as I worked with my lawyer and financial advisor to untangle the web of exploitation. Beyond the fraudulent accounts in my name, I discovered that my parents had been using my financial information in other ways. They had listed me as a guarantor on their home equity line of credit without my knowledge. They had used my address for tax purposes to claim certain deductions. They had even attempted to access my retirement accounts by claiming to be me over the phone, though thankfully the financial institution's security measures had prevented this. Each discovery felt like a fresh betrayal, reopening wounds I was trying desperately to heal. Dr. Winters helped me process these revelations, not as new injuries, but as confirmation that I had made the right decision to protect myself. They are showing you exactly who they are, she said during one particularly difficult session after I learned about the home equity line. Believe them. My meeting with the financial advisor, Blake, took on new urgency as we worked to secure my financial information and prevent further fraud. We froze my credit, changed all my accounts and passwords, and set up monitoring services to alert me to any suspicious activity. Unfortunately, this kind of financial abuse within families is more common than people realize, Blake told me. The betrayal of trust makes it particularly devastating. We calculated that in addition to the more than $200,000 I had knowingly given my parents, they had fraudulently obtained or committed me to approximately $70,000 in additional obligations. The total impact on my financial health approached $300,000, not counting the lost opportunity cost of investments I could have made. Despite this staggering sum, Blake assured me that my situation was far from hopeless. You have an excellent income, and now that you are not supporting multiple households, you can rebuild quickly. Within 2 years, you could be in a better financial position than most people your age. This perspective helped me focus on the future, rather than dwelling on what had been taken from me. I committed to a strict financial recovery plan, cutting unnecessary expenses and maximizing my retirement contributions. For the first time, I was saving and investing for myself, not to create a safety net for others. 3 months after the confrontation at the restaurant, I received an email from my father. The subject line read, "Reconciliation," but the content revealed a very different purpose. After a brief and obviously insincere apology if I felt hurt by anything they might have done, the email got to its real point. They were facing foreclosure on their house and needed my help one last time. The old me would have immediately responded with an offer of assistance, sacrificing my own financial health to rescue them yet again. The new me, strengthened by therapy and supported by genuine friends, recognized the manipulation for what it was. I forwarded the email to David, my lawyer, who confirmed that under our agreement, my parents were required to sell their house to pay off the fraudulent debts before facing foreclosure. They are trying to circumvent the legal agreement, David explained. If they contact you again about financial matters, direct them to me. I sent a brief, factual response referring them to the signed agreement and David's contact information. Within hours, my mother called, crying hysterically about becoming homeless. When I calmly reiterated that they needed to speak with my lawyer, her tears dried up instantly, replaced by cold fury. "You always were a selfish child," she hissed. "After everything we did for you, this is how you repay us? By sicking lawyers on your own parents?" "I am enforcing an agreement you signed after committing fraud in my name," I replied, surprised by my own steadiness. "That is not selfish. It is self-preservation." "We are your parents," she shouted, as if this relationship entitled them to commit crimes against me without consequences. "Yes, you are," I acknowledged, my voice heavy with a pain I didn't try to hide. "And that makes your betrayal even worse." I ended the call and immediately contacted Dr. Winters, who helped me work through the renewed guilt and doubt my mother's call had triggered. "They are using the parent card as a weapon," she observed. "But being parents gave them responsibilities toward you, not unlimited rights to exploit you." Meanwhile, my brother Michael revealed that our parents had been pressuring him to talk sense into me and convince me to help them keep their house. They had also approached my sister Amanda with the same request, suggesting that if she could persuade me to rescue them financially, they would help with her wedding after all. "They're trying to use us against each other," Michael said disgustedly. "They haven't changed at all." The most surprising development came when Jackson, Amanda's fiancé, contacted me directly. We had never been particularly close, but he wanted to meet for coffee to discuss something important. When we met, he seemed nervous but determined. "I need to tell you something about your parents," he began. "Last year, before Amanda and I were engaged, your father approached me with a proposition. He suggested that if I married Amanda, the family would benefit financially because you would pay for everything." I stared at him, stunned. "What?" Jackson nodded uncomfortably. "He implied that marrying into your family was a good move because you were the cash cow who would ensure everyone was taken care of." I was horrified, but Amanda assured me it wasn't like that you were just generous with family. The calculated nature of my father's thinking, the way he had viewed me not as a daughter, but as a resource to be exploited, and even used as a bargaining chip in others' relationships, left me speechless. "I wanted you to know," Jackson continued, "because Amanda and I are trying to build an honest relationship, and keeping this secret felt wrong. Plus, after what they did with those credit cards," he shook his head, "you deserve to know the truth." This conversation with Jackson was the final, devastating piece of evidence I needed to fully accept that my relationship with my parents had never been what I pretended it was. They had not seen me as a daughter to love and support, but as a useful tool to exploit for their own benefit. That night, I wrote a letter that I never intended to send, pouring out years of hurt, disappointment, and anger. The act of putting these feelings into words was cathartic, allowing me to acknowledge the depth of my pain without directing it at anyone. When I finished, I felt lighter, as if I had finally put down a burden I had been carrying for decades. 6 months after that confrontation at the restaurant, my life had transformed in ways I never could have imagined. Free from the financial burden of supporting my parents, and the emotional burden of seeking their approval, I discovered spaces within myself for new growth and genuine connections. My therapy sessions with Dr. Winters shifted from crisis management to deeper healing work. We explored the childhood patterns that had shaped my people-pleasing tendencies, and worked on developing a stronger sense of self-worth that wasn't tied to external validation or productivity. "You are inherently valuable," Dr. Winters would remind me, "not because of what you provide to others, but simply because you exist." This concept was revolutionary to someone who had been raised to believe my worth was measured by my usefulness to others. Gradually, I began to internalize this new perspective, making decisions based on my own needs and desires, rather than anticipating what others expected of me. One of the most significant changes was the development of a genuine support system outside my family. Julia, my colleague, who had supported me during the initial crisis, became a close friend. We began meeting weekly for coffee, sharing our experiences with difficult family dynamics and celebrating our small victories in establishing healthier patterns. I also joined a support group for adult children of emotionally abusive parents, where I found community with others who truly understood my experiences. The validation and shared wisdom of this group accelerated my healing in ways individual therapy alone could not have accomplished. The hardest part for me was accepting that I could not change them, shared one group member whose story resonated deeply with mine. Once I stopped trying to earn their love and focused on loving myself, everything shifted. As my inner circle transformed, so did my living situation. With my new financial freedom, I decided to sell my condominium and purchase a small house in a neighborhood I loved. The process of creating a home that reflected my taste and my priorities became a physical manifestation of my emotional journey. I painted the walls colors I had always admired, but my mother would have criticized as too bold. I arranged furniture for comfort and function, rather than appearance. I planted a garden in the small backyard, finding unexpected peace in nurturing growing things. My parents, meanwhile, were forced to downsize significantly after selling their house to comply with our legal agreement. They moved into a 2-bedroom apartment, and for the first time in decades, my father began actively looking for employment. According to Michael, who maintained limited contact with them, the transition was difficult and frequently blamed on me. Dad complains constantly about having to work at his age. Michael reported after a brief visit to their new apartment. Mom keeps saying they wouldn't be in this situation if their daughter hadn't abandoned them. Though these reports still stun, the pain was duller now, more a sad acknowledgement of what could never be, than an acute wound. I maintained my boundaries, firmly redirecting any direct contact about financial matters to my lawyer, and limiting other communication to brief, factual exchanges when necessary. As the months passed, my parents made several attempts at reconciliation, though their definition of making amends never included genuine accountability for their actions or behaviors. Each attempt followed a predictable pattern: initial warmth and vague apologies, followed by subtle hints about their financial difficulties, culminating in direct requests for assistance when the earlier approaches failed. Dr. Winters helped me recognize these patterns and respond appropriately, acknowledging any genuine effort at connection while firmly maintaining my boundaries around financial support. They need to experience the natural consequences of their actions, she reminded me. That is how real change happens, if it's going to happen at all. The approaching holiday season presented a new challenge. Thanksgiving had always been spent at my parents' house, with me providing the food and often the cooking, while enduring criticism about everything from the moistness of the turkey to my personal life choices. This year would be different. After careful consideration, I declined my parents' invitation, which had come with guilt-inducing references to possibly our last Thanksgiving in this apartment if things don't improve. Instead, I accepted Julia's invitation to join her family celebration. The contrast was illuminating. Julia's family welcomed me warmly, engaged me in genuine conversation, expressed interest in my life without judgment, and thanked me sincerely for the pie I had contributed. There were no backhanded compliments, no thinly veiled criticisms, no tensions simmering beneath forced politeness. "Is it always like this?" I asked Julia quietly, as we helped clean up after dinner. "Like what?" she asked, genuinely confused. "So pleasant? So free of drama and guilt?" Julia laughed, then grew serious when she realized I wasn't joking. "Not every family gathering is perfect, but yes, generally, it is like this. This is what family is supposed to feel like, Natalie." Her words stayed with me long after the holiday. This is what family is supposed to feel like. Not an obligation or a source of stress, but a genuine source of support and belonging. As Christmas approached, I made another significant decision. Rather than participating in the usual family gift exchange, which had always involved me giving expensive presents and receiving token items in return, I decided to redirect my holiday budget. I made donations to organizations supporting victims of financial abuse and children from disadvantaged backgrounds, causes that had become personally meaningful to me. I also created new traditions for myself, attending a holiday concert with Julia and her husband, volunteering at a community dinner, and hosting a small gathering for friends on Christmas Eve. My brother Michael and his wife Sarah joined us, bringing a homemade dish and simple, thoughtful gifts. Amanda and Jackson stopped by briefly, still navigating their own complicated feelings about our family dynamics. They had postponed their wedding indefinitely, choosing instead to save for a house and build their relationship on a more solid foundation before making that commitment. Your standing up to Mom and Dad made me realize I was rushing into marriage partly because it was what they expected, Amanda confided as we shared a quiet moment in the kitchen. I'm trying to figure out what I actually want, not what will please them or solve their problems. It was the most honest conversation we had ever had, an unexpected gift, more valuable than any wrapped present. The new year brought another surprising development. I received a job offer from a competing tech company, with a significant salary increase and more leadership responsibility. In the past, I would have declined immediately, worried about how a job change would affect my ability to support my family. Now, I was free to consider the opportunity based solely on my own career goals and interests. After careful consideration and consultation with mentors I trusted, I accepted the position. The transition reinvigorated my professional life, challenging me in new ways and connecting me with colleagues who valued my contributions. Within months, I was leading a major project that showcased my technical and leadership skills, earning recognition I would once have dismissed as undeserved. My financial situation improved rapidly as well. Without the drain of supporting multiple households, my savings grew quickly. Blake, my financial advisor, helped me develop a comprehensive plan that included retirement savings, investments, and funds for personal goals like travel and continued education. You are on track to achieve financial independence well ahead of schedule, he noted at our 6-month review meeting. The difference in your trajectory is remarkable. The most profound changes, however, were internal. I began to recognize and challenge the critical inner voice that had always echoed my parents' judgments. I practiced self-compassion when I made mistakes, instead of berating myself. I learned to identify my own preferences and desires, rather than automatically deferring to others. These shifts manifested in surprising ways. I discovered I actually enjoyed public speaking, something I had avoided because my father had once mocked a presentation I gave in high school. I found I preferred bold colors and patterns in my clothing, despite my mother's lifelong insistence that I should wear slimming neutrals. I realized I loved cooking elaborate meals when it was by choice, rather than obligation. Small discoveries perhaps, but they represented a fundamental reclamation of self that had been suppressed for decades under the weight of others' expectations and judgments. 1 year after the confrontation at the restaurant, I could look back and see not just what I had lost, but what I had gained. The journey had been painful, the costs real. Family relationships had been irreparably altered. Illusions of parental love shattered. Financial resources lost. Yet from those losses had emerged a stronger, more authentic self, capable of creating boundaries, recognizing genuine connection, and building a life aligned with my own values rather than others' demands. Exactly 1 year after the dinner that changed everything, I sat in my garden, reflecting on the journey. The spring flowers were blooming, a visual reminder of growth and renewal after a difficult winter. My new home, a modest but charming 2-bedroom house with a yard, represented more than just a physical space. It was a sanctuary I had created for myself, free from the influence and expectations of others. My relationship with my parents had settled into a carefully structured pattern. After months of attempted manipulation and several cycles of argument and superficial reconciliation, we had established what my therapist called structured contact. We communicated primarily through email, with occasional brief phone calls for specific purposes. Our interactions were civil but distant, focused on practical matters rather than emotional connection. My father had found part-time work as a consultant, though he frequently complained about the indignity of having to work at his age. My mother had taken a position at a local boutique, her first job in decades. They continued to live in their apartment, having finally accepted that their previous lifestyle, funded by my income, was no longer available to them. The legal agreement regarding the fraudulent accounts had been fulfilled, with the sale of their house covering most of the debts. I had absorbed some losses, but Blake assured me that my financial recovery was well ahead of schedule. My new job had come with equity options that were already showing promising returns, and my savings had grown substantially without the drain of supporting multiple households. More important than the financial resolution was the emotional freedom I had gained. Dr. Winters and I had worked through layers of conditioned guilt and obligation, developing new patterns of thought that allowed me to prioritize my own well-being without the crushing weight of shame that had once accompanied any act of self-care. The most significant change I see in you, Dr. Winters observed during a recent session, is your ability to distinguish between genuine responsibility and imposed obligation. You can now recognize when someone is attempting to manipulate you through guilt or family loyalty. This new discernment had allowed me to maintain healthier relationships with my siblings, who had undergone their own reckonings with our family dynamics. Michael and Sarah had become regular parts of my life, joining me for dinner every few weeks and sharing honest conversations about our upbringing and its effects. Amanda and I had developed a more tentative but increasingly authentic connection. After postponing her wedding, she had entered therapy herself, beginning to recognize how our parents' favoritism had shaped her sense of entitlement and dependency. Our conversations were sometimes uncomfortable, but always real, a stark contrast to the superficial interactions of the past. I never realized how much they pitted us against each other, she told me during a recent lunch. They made me believe you had it easy because you were smart and successful, while I needed their help and protection. Looking back, I can see they were using both of us in different ways. This insight from my sister, who had once been my parents' most effective tool for manipulation, represented a profound shift in our family system. The old dynamics were being questioned, the unspoken rules challenged, the established roles rejected. My social circle had expanded and deepened in ways I never could have anticipated. Julia and her husband had become close friends, including me in family gatherings and weekend activities. My support group for adult children of emotionally abusive parents had provided both healing and lasting friendships with people who truly understood my experiences. I had even begun dating again, cautiously at first, fearful of repeating patterns of giving too much and expecting too little. Thomas, a software architect I met through a professional conference, was patient with my careful boundaries and respectful of my journey. Our relationship was developing slowly, built on mutual respect and genuine interest, rather than need or obligation. Perhaps the most significant change was my relationship with myself. The critical inner voice that had echoed my parents' judgments for decades had gradually quieted, replaced by a more compassionate and realistic assessment of my strengths and weaknesses. I had learned to celebrate my accomplishments without dismissing them, and to acknowledge my mistakes without defining myself by them. This self-acceptance extended to my appearance, my preferences, my choices, and my needs. I no longer felt compelled to justify my existence through constant productivity or service to others. I could rest without guilt, pursue pleasure without shame, and express anger without fear. The healing was not complete, and perhaps never would be. There were still moments of doubt, flashes of the old patterns, occasional dreams in which I was once again the desperate child seeking approval that never came. But these moments no longer defined me or determined my choices. They were echoes of the past, not dictates for the present or future. As I sat in my garden on that anniversary, I reflected on the lessons of this difficult journey. True family is defined by mutual respect and support, not by blood or obligation. The people who had stood by me, validated my experiences, and respected my boundaries had proven to be more family to me than those who shared my DNA but exploited my loyalty. Setting boundaries is not selfish, it is essential for healthy relationships. By establishing and maintaining clear limits on what I would accept and provide, I had created space for more authentic connections, based on mutual care rather than exploitation. Financial independence is a form of self-protection. By securing my own resources and ensuring they were used according to my values and priorities, I had gained freedom from manipulation and control. Healing requires both separation and connection. Distancing myself from toxic relationships had been necessary, but equally important was building new, healthier relationships that demonstrated what genuine care and respect looked like. Self-worth is inherent, not earned through service or sacrifice. This was perhaps the most difficult lesson, requiring daily practice and reinforcement to counter decades of contrary messaging. Yet, it was also the most transformative, reshaping how I moved through the world and related to others. These lessons had come at a high cost. The illusion of unconditional parental love had been shattered. Family relationships permanently altered. Years of financial resources lost. Yet, what I had gained was far more valuable: authentic self-knowledge, genuine connections, and the freedom to create a life aligned with my own values rather than others' expectations. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across my garden, I felt a deep sense of peace. The journey was not over, but the hardest part was behind me. The path forward, while not always clear or easy, was mine to choose, guided by my own wisdom and surrounded by people who truly wished me well. If you've ever had to stand up for yourself against family, or untangle yourself from toxic dynamics, what was your turning point? What would you have done in my place? Tell me what you think in the comments below. I really want to know.